A cold CEO millionaire mistook the poor girl's warning. Her truth exposed the board's criminal pact. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. James Knight was a name synonymous with power and control. A self-made millionaire, James had built his empire from the ground up. He was known for his no-nonsense approach to business, his ability to turn around failing companies, and his ruthless demeanor in board meetings. But despite his success, James had one flaw. He didn't trust people easily. He relied on his intellect, his wealth, and his position to command respect, often ignoring those around him. Sophie Miller, on the other hand, was an entirely different story. A young woman with a modest background, Sophie had worked her way up in James's company, starting from a humble intern position. She wasn't like the other employees who simply followed orders. Sophie had a keen eye for details and an unyielding sense of right and wrong. Despite her lower position in the company, Sophie had always felt something wasn't right. The more she observed, the more she noticed cracks in the shiny facade of Knight Enterprises. There were whispers about suspicious activities in the upper management, shady financial deals, and people going to extreme lengths to cover their tracks. Sophie tried to ignore the unease that grew within her, but as time went on, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, and the picture wasn't pretty. She saw corruption, manipulation, and greed at play. But how could she, a mere employee, challenge someone as powerful as James Knight? That's when the warning came. Sophie, after weeks of gathering evidence, knew she had to do something. She approached James, her heart racing. She had seen what others had missed, and now she had proof. Sophie's warning was simple, yet profound. She told James that if he didn't act quickly, the company could face a scandal that could destroy everything he had worked for. The board members were involved in illegal activities, and they were all covering up their tracks. James, cold and calculating as always, listened to Sophie's warning, but only half-heartedly. He dismissed her concerns as baseless. He thought Sophie was just another naive employee who didn't understand the complexity of running a multi-million-dollar company. He told her to focus on her work and not to interfere with matters that didn't concern her. Sophie left his office that day, disheartened but determined. She knew that if no one else would listen to her, she had to do something on her own. Little did James know, Sophie's warning was just the beginning. As she dug deeper into the company's inner workings, the truth she uncovered was more dangerous than she could have imagined. What was once a few questionable actions turned into a full-blown criminal conspiracy. The board's pact wasn't just a minor lapse in judgment. It was a plan to embezzle millions of dollars and cover up fraudulent deals that could bring the entire company down. Sophie was about to expose the truth, but would she be able to do it before the web of deceit caught up with her? I had hoped that Sophie's warning would be nothing more than a distant memory, but the days that followed only confirmed my worst fears. The atmosphere at Knight Enterprises shifted as if an invisible cloud hung over the building. Despite Sophie's plea, nothing had changed. I had dismissed her concerns so easily. I was the CEO, after all. I was the one who made the big decisions, who could see through the noise, who knew what was important. Or so I thought. But the truth was, things weren't adding up. I started to notice small cracks that I had previously overlooked. The numbers in our quarterly reports weren't aligning. Vendors were becoming increasingly difficult to reach. And most concerning of all, key executives began acting strangely, as if they were hiding something. The board meetings became tense. Every time we gathered to discuss financial performance or new ventures, there was an unease in the room. No one spoke up. No one dared to challenge the status quo. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie's warning was something I should have paid more attention to. I couldn't dismiss her anymore. One evening, as the office was nearly empty and the city lights shimmered outside my office window, I called her in. "Sophie, we need to talk," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice betrayed me. She walked into my office, her demeanor just as reserved as always. She had a way of holding herself, never too eager to please, never too timid to speak her mind. "What's going on, James?" she asked. glancing around the room as if she were expecting to see something I hadn't noticed. There's something happening with the board. I've been going through the reports again, and some things don't add up. I need you to be straight with me, I said, sitting down, my fingers drumming nervously on the desk. Sophie paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing as if she were calculating the risks of what she was about to say. James, I've told you this before, and I'm telling you again, something's wrong. The board members are up to something. I've seen the signs, undocumented transactions, strange accounts, things that shouldn't be happening. If we don't act now, it could ruin everything. I leaned back in my chair, processing her words. The room felt smaller, more suffocating. Sophie wasn't like the others. She didn't speak in corporate jargon or try to manipulate her words. She was blunt, straightforward, and I respected that. But what she was suggesting was almost too outlandish to believe. Sophie, are you sure? This could destroy everything. You're asking me to take down the people who helped build this company. The ones I've trusted for years. I'm sure, she replied firmly. I've been gathering evidence, James. I can't ignore what I've found. It's not just a few suspicious transactions. It's a criminal network. And if you don't do something about it, you might as well be part of the problem. Her words hit me like a cold splash of water. The weight of the situation settled in. I had trusted the board members, many of whom had been with me since the beginning. To think that they could be involved in something illegal seemed impossible. But Sophie's certainty was undeniable. She had nothing to gain by making these accusations, and the evidence she claimed to have was starting to seem real. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost resigned. Sophie's eyes softened slightly, but there was still an edge of determination in them. I need your help, James. If we don't expose them now, we might never get another chance. I sat in silence for a long moment, the reality of the situation sinking in. Sophie was right. If this went public, it would be the end of everything I had built. My company, my reputation, my life's work, gone in an instant. But there was no turning back now. I had to make a decision. All right, I said finally, my voice low but steady. Let's do it. We'll expose them. Sophie nodded, her expression unreadable. The plan was set in motion, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger at play, something I still didn't fully understand. What would happen when the truth came to light? Would I be able to save my company, or had I waited too long to act? I woke up the next morning with a heavy weight on my chest. The decision I had made the night before was one I couldn't take back. Sophie and I had agreed to expose the truth, but I knew that there would be no going back once we did. The company I had built from the ground up, the empire I had spent years constructing, could all come crashing down in an instant. The stakes had never been higher. I sat at my desk, staring at the documents in front of me. Sophie had provided the proof, emails, financial reports, and even recordings of conversations between the board members. Each piece of evidence was more damning than the last, confirming what she had suspected all along. The board was involved in a massive embezzlement scheme, and they had been manipulating the company's finances for years. I had to act quickly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. There was no room for mistakes. If I made one wrong move, it could all fall apart. I had built Knight Enterprises on my ability to stay ahead of the curve, but this situation was different. This was a battle I wasn't prepared for. The moment I decided to confront the board was the moment I knew I was no longer just the CEO of a company. I was a man at war with his own creation. I scheduled a meeting with the board, hoping to catch them off guard. But as I walked into the boardroom that morning, I could sense the tension in the air. The usual confident smiles had been replaced with tight-lipped expressions and nervous glances. It was as if they all knew something was coming, but none of them were brave enough to speak up. I couldn't blame them. They were all complicit in the scheme, and they knew that if one of them spoke out, the entire plan would fall apart. I took my seat at the head of the table, my gaze sweeping over the faces of the men and women who had been my trusted allies for so long. But now, I couldn't trust any of them. I had to be careful. The conversation started innocently enough, with routine reports and updates. But I could feel the tension building with each passing minute. Finally, I could no longer stay silent. I know what you've been doing, I said, my voice calm but firm. The room went dead silent. It was as if everyone had frozen in place. No one spoke. No one moved. I leaned forward, locking eyes with each member of the board. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? All the lies, the money laundering, the illegal deals. But I know everything. I watched as their faces shifted from surprise to fear. They were caught, and they knew it. Sophie had been right. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The first to speak was Richard Hale, the CFO. His face had gone pale, and his hands trembled as he tried to regain control of the situation. "James, this isn't what you think," he stammered, his voice cracking. "We can explain." I could hear the desperation in his voice, but I wasn't interested in explanations. "Not anymore. You've had years to explain, Richard." "It's too late for that now," I replied coldly. The room fell into chaos. Board members began to argue, each one trying to shift the blame onto someone else, pointing fingers and making excuses. But I wasn't listening. I had already made up my mind. The truth had to come out, and I was the one who was going to make sure it did. I turned to Sophie, who was sitting quietly in the back of the room. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of doubt. I wasn't sure if it was fear or relief, but I knew that. She had done what she thought was right. She had helped me uncover a truth that no one wanted to face. But the question remained, what would we do with this truth? Sophie's warning had been clear. If we exposed the board's criminal activities, it could destroy everything. But if we didn't act, we would be complicit in the very same crimes. There was no easy answer. And as the tension in the room mounted, I realized that I was standing on the edge of something much bigger than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about saving my company anymore. It was about justice. And that was a fight I wasn't ready to lose. I could feel the tension rising with every passing second. The board members were desperate now, scrambling to save themselves, their words coming out in a rush, their explanations falling flat. They were caught in their lies, and I could see it in their eyes. They knew that they couldn't talk their way out of this one. Richard Hale, the CFO, was still trying to maintain his composure, but I could see him faltering. He had always been the one who handled the numbers, the one who covered up the gaps, and now it was all unraveling in front of him. "James, please, let's just talk about this," Richard pleaded, his voice shaking. "We can fix this. We've always been on your side." "On my side?" I repeated, my voice icy. "For years, you've been lining your pockets with money that doesn't belong to you. You've been stealing from the company, from me. And now, you want me to believe that you've been on my side." I leaned forward, my gaze never leaving Richard. The room was silent, save for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Every person in that room was on edge, waiting for someone to make a move. "This is not just about money, Richard," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "This is about trust. This is about the people who believed in this company, the employees who've worked day and night, and the customers who've put their faith in us. You've betrayed all of them." Sophie stood up, her presence calm, yet forceful. I could feel the weight of her gaze on me as she stepped closer. She had been the one to bring the truth to light, and now we were both facing the consequences. She wasn't afraid. She had done what she felt was right, and no matter how chaotic this moment was, I knew she wouldn't back down. "James is right," Sophie said, her voice steady. "We have the evidence. We have everything we need to expose you for what you are. There's no going back." The room seemed to freeze as the board members exchanged nervous glances. Some of them were starting to realize the gravity of the situation, while others were still clinging to the hope that they could find a way out. But there was no way out. Not this time. "You think you can just take us down like this?" It was Victoria Stone, the head of marketing, who spoke up. Her voice was laced with venom, and she stood with her arms crossed, as if daring me to continue. "Do you really think anyone will believe you? You're just a couple of employees. No one will listen to you. You have no proof." I could see the fear in her eyes, despite the bravado she tried to project. She was scared, and she knew she should be. Sophie turned to her with a calm expression. "You're wrong," Sophie said. "We have all the proof we need, and we've already contacted the authorities. They'll be here soon. It's only a matter of time before the truth comes out." The room went dead silent again. The realization was sinking in for everyone. They had been caught, and there was no escape. The fear was palpable. I could hear the sound of my own heart beating in my chest, but I couldn't afford to show weakness. I had to stay in control. "This is not just about us, Victoria," I said, turning to face her. "This is about the future of this company. You've been lying to everyone, and now it's time to face the consequences." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "The board's criminal pact ends today. You're all done." It felt surreal to say those words, but I knew they were true. The people I had once trusted, the people who had helped me build my empire, were now nothing more than criminals in my eyes. Sophie gave me a small nod, and in that moment, I realized how far we had come. We had started this journey with nothing but a belief that the truth had to come out. And now, the truth was finally being exposed. But as the room descended into chaos, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen next? What would happen to the company once everything came to light? Would we be able to rebuild, or would this scandal destroy everything we had worked so hard to build? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. We had set the wheels in motion, and there was no turning back now. The sound of the door opening startled me as I stood in the boardroom, still processing the chaos that had just unfolded. The authorities had arrived, just as Sophie had said they would, and their presence in the room felt like the final nail in the coffin. I could see the fear in the faces of the board members now. They had been so confident before, so sure they could manipulate the situation and cover up their actions. But now, with the police standing by and the evidence laid bare before them, their smugness had evaporated. Richard Hale, once so calm and composed, was shaking visibly. His earlier bravado had been replaced with desperation, and I could see him whispering frantically to the others, trying to find a way out. But there was no escape now. Sophie stood beside me, calm as ever, her eyes focused on the officers as they began their questioning. She had done it. She had uncovered the truth, and now it was in the hands of the law. I looked at her, and for the first time since all this began, I saw the weight of what she had done. It hadn't been easy for her. She had risked everything to expose the criminals in this room. And now, as the authorities began taking statements and gathering evidence, I realized just how much she had sacrificed. I had been caught up in my own fear of losing the company, of losing everything I had worked for. But Sophie's conviction had been unshakable. She knew this was bigger than business. This was about doing what was right. It was surreal, watching everything unfold. The board members who had once been untouchable, the people I had trusted with every aspect of my company, were now being led out of the room in handcuffs. Some of them were still protesting, trying to justify their actions, but there was no justification for what they had done. They had stolen millions, manipulated the company's finances, and endangered the future of Knight Enterprises, all for their own gain. I stood in silence, my mind racing. I had just dismantled the very foundation of the company I had spent years building. But was it worth it? The question lingered in my mind as I watched the officers take the last of the board members away. Was saving the company worth betraying my own values? Sophie looked at me and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I could see the pride in her eyes. She had done what she had set out to do. The truth had come out, and now it was time to rebuild. But the question still gnawed at me. Could I rebuild it? Could Knight Enterprises survive after everything that had happened? I turned to Sophie, who had been my rock through all of this. What now? I asked quietly. Sophie took a deep breath and looked around the empty room, the remnants of the chaos still hanging in the air. Now, we rebuild, she said simply. But it's not going to be easy. There's a lot of work ahead, and it's going to take time to earn back the trust of the employees, the investors, and the customers. But we can do it. If we stick to our principles and stay focused on what's important, we can come out of this stronger than ever. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in. She was right. It wasn't going to be easy, but it had to be done. The company had been built on trust, and now it was time to rebuild that trust from the ground up. As the authorities finished their work and the room started to empty, I took one last look at the space. It felt different now. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty, it was all gone. But in its place was a new feeling, hope. Hope that we could rebuild, hope that we could make things right, and hope that, despite everything that had happened, Knight Enterprises could emerge from the ashes stronger than ever. And it was with that hope that Sophie and I walked out of the room, ready to face the challenges ahead. It was only the beginning of the journey, but I knew one thing for certain. We would face it together. It had been weeks since the board members were arrested, and the dust was finally beginning to settle. The weight of everything that had happened was still heavy on my shoulders, but I was beginning to see the first signs of recovery. The company, once on the brink of collapse, was slowly finding its footing again. Sophie and I worked side by side every day, building a new foundation for Knight Enterprises. The road ahead wasn't easy, but at least it felt like we were headed in the right direction. We had to rebuild trust, both within the company and with our clients. It was going to take time, but I was determined to see it through. Sophie was a quiet force in the background, making sure everything was running smoothly. Her attention to detail, her unwavering commitment to doing what was right, had become the glue that held everything together. I couldn't have done it without her. Every morning, I walked into the office with a renewed sense of purpose. I had made mistakes, but I was committed to correcting them. The company needed a leader who could guide them through the aftermath of the scandal, someone who could bring integrity back to Knight Enterprises. I didn't want to be the kind of leader who only cared about profits. I wanted to be someone who inspired trust, who worked alongside the employees, who was there for the people who had supported the company through thick and thin. The first step in rebuilding was addressing the employees. I called a company-wide meeting, and when the day came, I stood before them, feeling the weight of their gazes on me. These were the people who had been through the storm with me, the ones who had seen the company at its lowest point. I want to start by thanking you all, I said, my voice steady but sincere. Thank you for sticking with Knight Enterprises, for believing in this company, and for supporting us through everything. We've been through a lot, but I truly believe that we can come out of this stronger. We will rebuild, and we will do it the right way. I'm committed to making sure that this company is built on a foundation of trust, integrity, and respect. No more shortcuts. No more lies. The room was silent for a moment, and then I saw heads nodding in agreement. People were starting to believe in what I was saying. They were starting to believe in the future of the company again. After the meeting, I spent time talking with individual employees, listening to their concerns, and reassuring them that things would improve. Slowly but surely, the morale in the office began to shift. The toxic atmosphere that had once plagued Knight Enterprises was starting to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and hope. Sophie was a huge part of that. She had been the one who had started this journey, the one who had risked everything to uncover the truth. And now, as we worked together to rebuild the company, I could see how much she had grown, how much she had learned, and how much she had contributed to our success. She was more than just an employee now. She was a partner, someone whose opinion I valued and whose judgment I trusted. But even as things were improving, there was always the lingering question in the back of my mind. What would the outside world think of us now? Would clients trust us again? Would investors return? I knew we had a long road ahead, but I was determined to do whatever it took to restore Knight Enterprises' reputation. Every phone call, every meeting with clients, every deal we made, each one was a small step toward rebuilding. Sophie and I worked tirelessly, doing everything we could to prove that we were worthy of the trust we had lost. We made changes within the company, updated our policies, and even introduced a new transparency initiative. We wanted to show the world that we had learned from our mistakes and that we were committed to being a different kind of company, one that valued honesty over profit, integrity over shortcuts. The first major test came when we landed a new contract with a major client. It was a huge win for us, and it felt like a sign that we were headed in the right direction. But the road wasn't smooth. There were still challenges ahead, clients who were hesitant to work with us, competitors who were trying to take advantage of our situation, but we didn't let it stop us. We kept pushing forward, and slowly, the results started to show. Knight Enterprises was no longer the company people whispered about behind closed doors. We were becoming a company that people respected again. And through it all, I couldn't help but think back to that first moment when Sophie had come to me with the truth. She had changed everything. She had given me the courage to do what was right, to stand up for integrity, and to rebuild my company from the ground up. She was the reason we were still standing, and I knew I would never be able to thank her enough for everything she had done. The momentum of rebuilding Knight Enterprises continued, but with every small victory came the pressure of keeping the company on track. The new systems we put in place were starting to show results, but there was still a lingering sense of uncertainty. Would this company ever truly be free of its past? Would the outside world ever fully trust us again? The progress felt real, but I knew there were still hurdles we hadn't even seen yet. Sophie and I continued working together, pushing each other forward, and with each passing day, I saw the company evolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. She had become more than just a coworker. She had become an essential part of my leadership team. We were in sync, our goals aligned, and I had no doubt that we would get through this as long as we had each other's backs. One afternoon, I was sitting in my office, going over the latest quarterly reports when Sophie walked in. She looked more relaxed than usual, a slight smile on her face as she sat down across from me. "We're making progress," she said simply. "The new marketing campaign is gaining traction, and we've already seen a 20% increase in client inquiries." I couldn't help but smile at the news. It was exactly what we needed, momentum. "That's great," I said. "We've still got a long way to go, but we're moving in the right direction." Sophie nodded, her eyes glinting with a mixture of determination and pride. "We're doing this together, James. We've come this far, and we're not stopping now." It was strange, hearing her say that. In the beginning, I hadn't even known if I could trust her. But now, I couldn't imagine running this company without her. She had become the steady hand, the one who helped me see the bigger picture when everything felt chaotic. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. "Do you ever wonder what could have happened if we hadn't acted when we did?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Sophie thought for a moment before answering. "I think about it sometimes," she said slowly. "But I don't regret what we did. If we hadn't exposed the truth, it would have eaten away at us, and the company would have been doomed anyway. We did what was right." Her words resonated with me, and I realized that she was right. We had made the hard choices, the choices that no one else wanted to make. It hadn't been easy, but it was the only way forward. And now, Knight Enterprises was stronger because of it. The conversation shifted to new projects and upcoming meetings, but as Sophie spoke, my mind kept drifting back to the same thought. We had turned a corner. There was no going back now. I glanced out the window, taking in the city below. It was a beautiful view, but it was also a reminder of how far we had come and how far we still had to go. Rebuilding a company was never easy. It wasn't just about fixing the financials or winning back clients. It was about restoring the soul of the company, the people who made it what it was. And that would take time. Over the next few weeks, Sophie and I worked tirelessly, focusing on rebranding the company and strengthening our relationships with key partners. We hosted town halls to engage with employees and make sure they felt heard. We reached out to former clients, offering them transparency and a renewed commitment to quality service. Slowly but surely, the seeds of trust were being planted again. But even as things were improving, I knew there were still challenges ahead. Competition was fierce, and we were constantly under scrutiny. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Knight Enterprises had been through the ringer, but we were proving we had the resilience to bounce back. We were starting to win back some of the market share we had lost during the scandal, and our reputation was beginning to recover. But the road ahead wasn't without obstacles. Every new client, every new deal felt like another test. Would they trust us? Would they see us as the company we were becoming? Or would they still see us as the company from the past? It was a question I asked myself every day, but it was also a question I had to push aside in order to keep moving forward. And so, with Sophie by my side, I focused on the future. We kept building, kept working, kept proving ourselves. The journey wasn't over, but I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. We were on the right path. And as long as we stayed true to our values, we could rebuild this company, and maybe, just maybe, we could turn it into something even better than before. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, Knight Enterprises was starting to feel like the company it once was, strong, reliable, and driven by a shared purpose. We had made it through the storm, but the journey wasn't over yet. Sophie and I had a long list of tasks ahead, but we were more focused than ever. We knew the company needed to rebuild its relationships with investors, employees, and clients. But it wasn't just about making promises. It was about showing them through actions that we had changed. One of the first things we did was reintroduce transparency into everything we did. We invited all of our employees to an open meeting where we explained what happened, what we had done to correct it, and most importantly, how we planned to move forward. It was important to show them that we valued their trust, that we understood how much we had let them down, and we were committed to making things right. The turnout was overwhelming. Employees from all departments showed up, eager to hear what we had to say. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but there was also a sense of hope. They had been through a lot, just like us, and now they needed to believe in the future of Knight Enterprises. Sophie spoke first, her voice steady and clear. She explained the steps we had taken to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never happen again. "We've learned from our mistakes," she said, looking around the room. "And we're committed to building a company where integrity is the foundation of everything we do." I could see the employees responding to her words. They were listening. They wanted to believe in us again. After the meeting, I had a one-on-one conversation with several department heads. We discussed how we could improve our internal processes, how we could keep the lines of communication open, and most importantly, how we could ensure that our values were being lived out in every decision we made. It was clear that we had a long way to go, but I was encouraged by the commitment I saw in the room. Everyone was on board. The hard part, though, was still ahead of us. We needed to win back the trust of our clients. And that wasn't something we could do overnight. I personally reached out to several of our major clients, some of whom had distanced themselves from us after the scandal. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to try. I set up meetings with each of them, explaining what we had learned from the past and how we had turned the company around. I didn't expect them to just take my word for it. I knew action spoke louder than words. Over time, we started to see a shift. Slowly but surely, our clients began to come back. They appreciated the honesty we showed and the improvements we made to ensure that Knight Enterprises was once again a company they could trust. Still, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the journey ahead. Rebuilding a company was not a quick fix. It wasn't just about getting back to where we were. It was about building something better. And that meant continuing to work day in and day out, making sure that every decision was grounded in the lessons we had learned. It was clear that Sophie was right. We had to rebuild not just the business, but the company's soul. We started putting new initiatives in place, ones that promoted innovation, ethics, and accountability. I focused on fostering a culture of openness, where feedback was welcomed and where every employee had a voice. There was no more room for secrecy, no more room for dishonesty. As we moved forward, I couldn't help but think back to the days when everything seemed perfect, when I was convinced that Knight Enterprises could do no wrong. I had been blind to the cracks, to the warning signs. But now, I saw everything clearly. I wasn't just leading a company anymore. I was leading a movement. A movement to prove that a company could be successful without compromising its values. Sophie and I had come a long way, and though there were still obstacles ahead, I knew that we had built something that could endure. The road to redemption was never easy, but with every step forward, we were proving that Knight Enterprises wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And as long as we stayed true to our mission, there was nothing we couldn't overcome. Months had passed since the worst of the scandal, and Knight Enterprises was beginning to show signs of rebirth. The company was not where it needed to be yet, but it was moving forward, and that was something. Sophie and I were more aligned than ever, and our collaboration had become the backbone of the transformation we were undergoing. One thing became clear to me. The journey to rebuild Knight Enterprises was more than just a business venture. It was a personal journey as well. I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had built this company out of ambition alone. I had learned that trust, integrity, and transparency were not just values you spoke about, they were values you lived by. We had spent months rebuilding the company's reputation, but the internal culture still needed work. Employees needed to believe that the changes we had made were more than just cosmetic. They needed to feel that their voices were heard, that they were valued, and that the company truly cared about their well-being. Sophie had been instrumental in that shift. She understood the importance of creating a work environment where people felt empowered and motivated. We began hosting regular feedback sessions where employees could speak openly about their concerns. These weren't just one-way conversations where we spoke at them. We listened. We made it clear that everyone, from the top to the bottom, was part of the process of rebuilding. One afternoon, Sophie and I sat down to go over the latest round of feedback. We had received numerous positive responses about the changes in the company's direction, but there were still areas of concern. People were still cautious. They were still unsure if the company had truly changed. "It's going to take time," Sophie said, her voice steady as always. "You can't expect trust to be rebuilt overnight. But we're on the right path. The fact that people are speaking up means they care. They want to see this company succeed." I nodded, agreeing with her. "I know, but I can't help but feel like we're running out of time. The competition is fierce, and we're still facing the fallout from the past. Every new contract we land feels like it's a step toward redemption, but what if it's not enough?" Sophie met my gaze, her expression serious but confident. You're not alone in this. We're doing it together. The trust we've earned, however small, will grow. It's just about staying consistent. Her words were a reminder of everything we had worked for. There was no quick fix to what we were going through. But every day, every decision, every conversation was another building block in the foundation of the company's future. The next challenge came in the form of an investor meeting that could potentially bring in a significant amount of capital to the company. It was a high-stakes situation, and I knew that the pressure was on. I spent the entire week preparing for it, along with Sophie. We reviewed all our numbers, all the positive changes we had made, and how we planned to sustain that growth. On the day of the meeting, I could feel the tension in the air. As we entered the conference room, I glanced at Sophie, who gave me a small but encouraging smile. We sat across from the investors, who looked at us expectantly. I began the meeting by speaking honestly about the challenges we had faced and how they had reshaped the company. I was transparent about the mistakes we had made, but I also shared the lessons we had learned. Knight Enterprises is no longer the company it was a year ago, I said. We've rebuilt, we've redefined our values, and we've created a stronger, more resilient company. But we know that actions speak louder than words. We're committed to proving that we are worthy of your trust, both today and in the future. The investors listened carefully, their faces unreadable. I could feel the weight of their judgment. But when the meeting ended, they didn't give us a clear answer. Instead, they told us they would need time to think it over. Walking out of that room, I was left with a sense of uncertainty. Had we done enough to convince them? Or was it just too soon? Sophie didn't share my concerns. We did our best, she said. That's all we can do. The rest is out of our hands now. She was right, of course. All we could do was keep proving ourselves every day. And that was exactly what we planned to do. With every new contract, every new client, every decision we made, we were rewriting our story. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. We were no longer the company we once were. We had come too far, we had fought too hard, and we were stronger than ever before. It had been a few weeks since the investor meeting, and the uncertainty about our future was starting to weigh heavily on me. Sophie and I had given everything to prove that Knight Enterprises was on the right track, but in the back of my mind, I still questioned whether it was enough. I knew we had come a long way, but the road ahead was still long and filled with unknowns. One afternoon, as I was going over our next steps, I received a call from one of the investors who had attended the meeting. My heart raced as I answered. James, the voice on the other end said, we've reviewed everything thoroughly, and we're ready to move forward with the investment. We believe in the changes you've made and the direction you're heading. I sat back in my chair, letting the words sink in. This was it. This was the break we needed. Thank you. I replied, my voice steady but filled with relief. We won't let you down. After the call, I stood up, walked over to Sophie's desk, and shared the news with her. She didn't seem surprised. I knew we'd get it, she said with a smile. We've put in the work and it shows. We both knew that this investment was just the beginning. The funds would help us scale, improve our systems, and build a more sustainable future for the company. But it also meant that the pressure was now even greater. We had to prove ourselves not just to ourselves, but to the investors who had placed their trust in us. The next few months were a blur of activity. We hired new talent, streamlined our operations, and invested in technology that would help us stay ahead of the competition. Every decision we made was focused on the long-term success of Knight Enterprises. We didn't just want to survive, we wanted to thrive. As the company began to grow again, I could see the change in the way people viewed us. Clients who had once been hesitant to work with us were now coming back. Our reputation was slowly but surely being restored, and with it, a renewed sense of confidence within the company. But with growth came new challenges. The market was shifting, and we had to adapt quickly. Competitors were always looking for ways to undercut us, and there were days when I felt like we were constantly fighting to stay one step ahead. Sophie remained a constant source of support during this time. Her insights were invaluable, and her ability to see the bigger picture kept me grounded. She often reminded me that growth wasn't just about numbers, it was about people. As long as we continue to take care of our employees and clients, the numbers will follow, she would say. I took her words to heart, and it became the guiding principle of our strategy. Slowly, we began to see results. More contracts came in, and our client base expanded. We were no longer just a company trying to recover from scandal. We were a company on the rise, with a renewed sense of purpose and direction. But the real test came one afternoon when we received a call from a potential client, one of the biggest in our industry. They had been following our progress and were interested in partnering with us. This was the moment we had been waiting for. This deal could solidify our comeback and take Knight Enterprises to the next level. Sophie and I spent hours preparing for the meeting, reviewing every detail, making sure we could showcase our strengths and prove that we were ready for such a significant opportunity. When the day of the meeting arrived, I was nervous but excited. Sophie was by my side, as always, ready to face whatever came our way. As we walked into the meeting room, I felt a sense of confidence I hadn't felt in a long time. We had done the work. We had earned this. The presentation went smoothly, and by the end of it, the potential client was sold. They signed the deal, and we walked out of that meeting knowing that this was the turning point we had been waiting for. The deal was a major milestone for Knight Enterprises, but it wasn't just about the financial gain. It was about proving to ourselves that we had truly turned the corner. We had faced our darkest days and come out stronger on the other side. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, I knew we were finally on the path to the future we had envisioned. Together, Sophie and I had rebuilt Knight Enterprises, not just as a company, but as a force to be reckoned with. And as we looked toward the future, we knew that no challenge would ever be too great for us to overcome. The success of securing the deal with a major client was a victory, but it was only one step in the long journey we had ahead of us. The pressure to maintain momentum was constant, and with each success came the reality that we had to continue proving ourselves. As much as I wanted to celebrate, I knew the true work was just beginning. Knight Enterprises was no longer a company haunted by scandal. It was a company in the process of transformation, and transformation wasn't easy. Sophie and I kept a close watch on the team, ensuring that everyone remained focused and that the values we had built into the company's culture were being upheld at every level. It was clear that the work environment had improved. Employees were more engaged, more willing to share their ideas, and most importantly, they believed in the vision we had for the future. There was a renewed sense of pride in the office, and it was contagious. But even with all the progress, I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders more than ever. We had rebuilt our reputation, but I still wondered if we had truly earned the trust of everyone we worked with. Every conversation, every decision felt like it was being scrutinized, not just by others, but by myself. Had we really turned the corner, or was this just a temporary illusion? Sophie sensed my doubt one evening as we sat in my office, reviewing the latest project reports. She leaned back in her chair and gave me a knowing look. "You're still carrying the weight of the past," she said softly. "I can see it. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore. We've come so far. It's time to trust in what we've built." I looked at her, and for the first time in a while, I realized she was right. I had been so focused on fixing the past that I hadn't fully embraced the present. The company was no longer in crisis mode. It was growing, evolving, and thriving. It was time to trust the process and the people who had helped make it possible. "You're right," I said quietly, a weight lifting from my chest. "We've done it. We've really done it." The next few weeks felt like a turning point. With Sophie's support and the confidence we were regaining, I was able to focus on what lay ahead. We began implementing new initiatives aimed at pushing the company forward in ways that would secure its future. Our expansion into new markets was progressing, and we started to see results from our efforts to diversify our product offerings. But even as we grew, I couldn't shake the thought that we still had something to prove. It was one thing to survive a crisis. It was another to build something lasting. One afternoon, I received an email from one of our largest investors. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the progress we had made in our vision for the next phase of Knight Enterprises. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. We were on track to announce our new line of products, and everything felt aligned for the next phase of the company's growth. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. The day of the meeting arrived, and Sophie and I were prepared. We had everything ready: financial projections, product development timelines, and an updated roadmap that showed how we planned to continue scaling the company. As I sat across from the investors, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This meeting was important. It wasn't just about securing funding. It was about showing that we were ready for the next big step. I want to start by saying how much we appreciate the support you've given us, I said as I began the meeting. It hasn't been easy, but we've learned from our past mistakes and have used those lessons to build a stronger company. We're ready to take Knight Enterprises to the next level, and we're committed to proving that our growth is sustainable. Sophie added, we're not just looking at short-term gains. We have a long-term vision for Knight Enterprises. We're committed to building a company that is not only profitable, but one that makes a positive impact on the industry and the community. The investors listened closely, their expressions unreadable. But after a few moments of silence, one of them finally spoke. We believe in what you're doing, he said. Your progress is impressive, and we're excited to see where you're going. We're in for the next phase. The weight of his words hit me, but in the best way possible. This was the validation we needed. We had earned their trust. We were moving in the right direction. The investment was secured, and with it came the promise of further growth. That evening, Sophie and I stood on the balcony of my office, looking out at the city skyline. It was a moment of quiet reflection. We had done it. We had turned this company around, and now, we were on the verge of something bigger than we had ever imagined. We're not done yet, I said, turning to Sophie. But we're close. And together, we're going to make this company the best it's ever been. Sophie smiled, her confidence unwavering. We've already made it great. The rest is just the beginning. The success of securing the next phase of investment was a milestone, but it wasn't the end of the road. If anything, it was a new beginning. With the funds in place and the pressure of the past now officially behind us, Sophie and I knew that this was the moment where Knight Enterprises would truly define its future. We had worked so hard to rebuild what had been torn down, but now it was time to grow beyond what we had been. We were no longer just recovering, we were advancing. The first order of business was focusing on innovation. The market was shifting faster than ever before, and if we wanted to stay ahead, we had to be at the forefront of change. Sophie and I spent countless hours discussing the next steps. We brainstormed new ideas, new products, and ways to modernize the company. We need to think bigger, Sophie said one evening as we were going over some initial product designs. We've built a strong foundation, but now we have the opportunity to lead the industry. Let's not just catch up, let's set the pace. I couldn't have agreed more. For so long, we had been operating in survival mode. Now, we had to operate with vision, not just caution. We began to pour resources into research and development, hiring top-tier talent, and acquiring the technology we needed to scale. It was clear that innovation was the key to staying relevant, but we also had to ensure that we stayed true to the values that had brought us here. We couldn't compromise on quality or integrity. Every new project, every new product had to align with our core principles. As the weeks went by, I began to see the fruits of our labor. The team was excited, motivated, and driven by a shared sense of purpose. For the first time in a long time, I felt confident that we were on the right path. The momentum was real. With the company growing, we also focused on strengthening relationships with our existing clients. We knew we couldn't take their loyalty for granted, and we made a point of showing them that we appreciated their trust. Personal outreach became a cornerstone of our strategy. I personally met with our longtime clients, listened to their feedback, and shared our vision for the future. It wasn't just about doing business, it was about building partnerships. One afternoon, after an especially productive client meeting, I walked back to my office, a sense of satisfaction filling me. The company was not just getting by anymore. We were thriving. But even as everything was moving in the right direction, I knew that the true test would come when we launched our new product line. This would be the real test of how far we had come. It wasn't just about having a great idea. It was about executing it flawlessly. Sophie and I were meticulous in planning every detail, from marketing to distribution. We had learned the hard way that even the smallest mistake could have big consequences. The launch day arrived, and the anticipation was palpable. The team had worked tirelessly to get everything ready. I was nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness than I had felt before. This time, it wasn't about whether we would succeed or fail. It was about proving to ourselves that we could do it on our own terms. The product launch was nothing short of a success. The response from both clients and the public was overwhelmingly positive. Sales exceeded our expectations, and more importantly, we had earned back the trust of the industry. I stood in front of the team after the launch, taking in the energy of the room. We did it, I said, my voice steady with pride. We've shown everyone that Knight Enterprises isn't just back, it's better than ever. And this is only the beginning. As the months passed, our success continued to build on itself. Our new products were met with critical acclaim, and our reputation was solidified as one of the most innovative and reliable companies in the industry. But as much as we had accomplished, I knew that the work was never truly done. Sophie and I had rebuilt Knight Enterprises not just in terms of products or finances, but in its very essence. We had created a company that was resilient, focused on long-term growth, and committed to doing business the right way. The future was bright, and for the first time in years, I felt truly optimistic about what lay ahead. We had proven that, no matter how hard the road was, we had the strength to walk it and the vision to lead it. As Knight Enterprises continued to expand, Sophie and I found ourselves facing new challenges at every turn. The success of our product launch had set us on a trajectory we hadn't fully anticipated. The industry was noticing us again, and with that attention came the responsibility to maintain our standards. Our growth was no longer just about recovering from the past. It was about staying ahead of a rapidly changing market. The team was energized, but there was a noticeable shift in the way we operated. We had to remain adaptable, keep innovating, and manage the growing expectations that came with our newfound success. One of the most significant challenges we faced in this phase was scaling. We were getting larger, but scaling wasn't just about increasing production or expanding our sales teams. It was about keeping the company's culture intact. It was about ensuring that the values that had guided us through our darkest days would remain the foundation of everything we did. Sophie and I had regular check-ins with the leadership team, making sure we were on track. We wanted to make sure that as we grew, we didn't lose sight of what had gotten us here: trust, integrity, and collaboration. "We've worked too hard to let the culture slip," Sophie said one afternoon as we sat in my office, reviewing feedback from the employees. "We need to make sure that every new hire, every new process, reflects who we are now." She was right. I could already see the growing pains. New team members, while talented, sometimes struggled to understand the deep-rooted culture we had fought so hard to rebuild. It was up to us to make sure that didn't change. To help, we introduced a comprehensive onboarding process focused on our core values. We made sure that every employee understood not just what we were building, but why we were building it. Over time, we saw the results. The team was united, driven by a shared sense of purpose. The challenges of scaling, though difficult, became opportunities to strengthen our foundation. But it wasn't just internal growth we had to manage, it was also external. As Knight Enterprises became more visible, we began to attract more competitors. The market had always been competitive, but now we were a prime target. I found myself staying up late at night, strategizing with Sophie on how we could stay ahead. It was a familiar feeling, the pressure to perform, to never let up, but this time, I felt ready. The lessons of the past had shaped us, and I knew we were better equipped to handle this kind of pressure than we had ever been. One night, Sophie and I were working late, finalizing a deal with a major partner when she looked at me and said, "We're not just surviving anymore. We're thriving. And it feels good, doesn't it?" I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. It does. We've come a long way. The following week, we launched another new product, one that would further cement Knight Enterprises' position in the industry. But this time, I wasn't nervous. I was confident. We had already built a reputation for innovation and reliability, and this product was just another example of how far we had come. The launch was a huge success, and within weeks, it was clear that Knight Enterprises was not just back, it was leading the charge in its industry. The growth we had worked so hard for was not just sustainable, it was accelerating. But with that success came new questions. What would the future hold? What could we accomplish next? As I stood in my office, looking out over the city, I realized that we had only just scratched the surface. There was so much more to do, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but that was what made it so exciting. Knight Enterprises had become something more than just a company. It had become a symbol of resilience, innovation, and the power of perseverance. And as long as we stayed true to our values, I knew there was no limit to what we could achieve. Together, Sophie and I had built something extraordinary, and we weren't finished yet.